We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to AVRant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H.
Infinite Gary. Infinite Gary found a video on YouTube that caused him some confusion regarding how LG's OLED TVs handle high dynamic range and Dolby Vision in particular. The video goes through LG's own specs and marketing to confirm that the OLED TVs aren't capable of showing a full Dolby Vision signal, and therefore they call it fake Dolby Vision. I imagine this is not from LG, this video that I did not watch.
And this video had so much misinformation in it. I'm not even going to link to it in our show notes. I don't want people watching it. It's not worth getting confused over, but I wanted to address the bigger topic that comes up.
All right. The uploader has disabled comments for the video after it became a shouting match, but it hasn't removed the video itself. Can we clarify what the real situation is and when it comes to LG's OLEDs and their HDR and Dolby Vision? Before we get into this, this is a classic case of not listening to Tom's advice, which is when you buy something new, get off the internet for like a good couple of months. Don't read anything about your device that you just bought. With speakers, displays, projectors, furniture, just get off the internet. And if you see something that says, review of this, blah, 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 you're like, don't even read it. Just step away because it's just going to drive you crazy. Or you can read it and then ask us about it. So, Rob?
Yeah, so what I wanted to address, because this can be a confusing topic for people, and if someone watched this video without having any knowledge, the problem is it's the classic thing of quite a bit of the facts that he stated about what Dolby Vision can do were correct. He was actually correct in the specs, but then he got a whole bunch wrong about how the entire HDR system in general works. But there's an understandable reason why he got it all wrong. So when we started with standard dynamic range, we actually had a pretty easy situation. It was, here's what the signal can hold. It's 8 bits, it's Rec. 709 color, it goes up to 100 nits. All right, that was the signal. That's what you could put on a Blu-ray disc. And all of the mastering televisions that all the studios and TV studios use to make the content, that's what they did. Rec. 709 color, 8-bit panels, 100 nits brightness. So you could get a consumer display that did all those things. So all three of them lined up perfectly. The signal, the mastering displays, and the consumer displays all did the same thing. This person who made this video assumes that HDR works the same way. That's the basic fallacy of what he was saying. He's like, Dolby Vision can hold a 12-bit signal. It can hold Rec. 2020 color, and it can hold up to 10,000 nits in the signal. And that is all true. The Dolby Vision signal itself can contain all of those things. There is not a single mastering display that can show that. There are 12-bit mastering displays. There are some experimental laser displays that can show Rec. 2020 color. There are no displays that can show 10,000 nits of brightness yet. That's in the mastering. That's where the $30,000, $40,000 TVs are. In the consumer world, there's absolutely nothing that can even come close. So LG says, hey, we have a 10-bit panel. Yes, they do. We can show up to 99% of DCI P3 color, which is like 67% of Rec. 2020 color. That's also true. And they can go up to about 800 nits. Okay, so that's what LG says. So this person put all that together and they're like, well, it's not 12-bit, it's not Rec. 2020, it's not 10,000 nits, that's not really Dolby Vision. It's like, no, that's unfortunately a fallacy. It doesn't work the way things worked in the standard dynamic range 1080p days. With high dynamic range, you can have a signal that is much, much bigger than what any display can show. The mastering display will show more of that signal than the consumer display. And the consumer displays, year over year, will continue to get better and better and eventually show more and more of that signal. But the whole point of Dolby Vision is that Dolby themselves looks at the TVs that are being certified as Dolby Vision televisions, and they say, here is how to translate the signal, this massive, huge signal, of 12-bit color and 12-bit and Rec. 2020 and 10,000 nits. Here's how to translate that down to what the TV can do. That's the secret sauce in Dolby Vision, is that Dolby themselves defines how to shrink it down to the capabilities of the TV you're watching. That's what makes it a Dolby Vision TV. There's nothing fake about that. There's nothing wrong about what LG is doing. They're not misleading anybody. It's a Dolby Vision TV. So it's a little bit tough to understand, but the whole idea is you make the content once with these parameters that exceed what anything can do. In future years, when we have TVs that get better and better, they can show you more and more of that signal. That's the sort of beauty of it. That makes sense?
Yeah. I wasn't listening to you.
I know.
I'm sorry. I just accidentally turned off the question. So hold on a second. I'll scroll back down to it.
Alrighty.
I had a little bit of an issue there, so I was trying to flip back and forth between these emails.
But yeah, I will say if you happen to stumble upon this video somehow yourself, I mean, he seems to just be against OLEDs in general and seems to be a bigger fan of Samsung and all that. So there's some weirdness in the video, which is why I don't want to mislead anybody. But explaining what is going on with HDR, that is a confusing topic because it does not work the way our previous system did. And there are people who are like professionals in the industry making content who are themselves confused about it too, right? So it's not just consumers who are confused about this stuff because it is a new way of approaching delivering content.
So now that the 2017 OLED models have been announced and shown at CES, what significant improvements have been made over the 2016 models, and what further improvements do we expect to see in 2018?
They got a bit brighter.
I mean, that's generally what they do, right? They get a bit brighter every year for a while, and then somebody will announce, something new, like, Darby or something that they added to it. So in 2018, what do we expect to see? I expect them to get just a little bit brighter.
A little bit brighter again. Yeah.
A little bit brighter than that.
Yeah, from
Continue
2017
to get brighter.
over 2016, they got a little bit brighter. They claim 1% more of DCI-P3 color than the previous year.
I expect everything. All the specs that you see right now are going to expand a little bit from year to year. How much of it will be actual performance differences?
Yeah,
some of it will be. Some of it will be performance differences that you can measure but not see, and some will be some that you can see.
Yeah.
And some will just be in measurement differences in how we measure things, and now it looks better on paper.
They killed 3D. They made them even skinnier so that you can 4 millimeters on the wall. That was things.
We'll see that smaller bezels and bigger bezels. We'll see thinner and fatter. Yeah. We'll see better speakers and worse speakers.
Maybe more bendy.
No speakers. Oh, God help us.
But actually, the one big thing, and this came up with reps from Sony, and I actually agree with them on this. One thing that will be changing year over year is more and more processing power. One thing LG announced in this current year is what they're calling active HDR, which is just their fancy name for better tone mapping. Right, but that's something that the 2016s didn't do as well as the 2017s do. That's due to having more processing power and being able to process each individual frame that much faster, that much better. So that actually can have an impact when we're talking about 4K video. A lot of stuff is still going to be upscaled. A lot of stuff is still going to be converted from standard dynamic range to high dynamic range if you want to do that. A lot of stuff is still going to, the signal, like we just talked about, the signal is going to exceed what the TV can do. If you can better translate that to the capabilities of the TV, that could give you a better looking image. So the processing behind the scenes could improve as well.
Yeah. He asked, right now we have 10-bit flat panels. When do we think 12-bit flat panels will hit the market? 2019? Later? I don't know that I know or have any way of guessing.
I
don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, do they really want to replace HDR10 already? Because HDR10 tops out at 10 bits.
My
guess,
Vision,
like we just talked about, can hold 12 bits.
I mean, okay, this is when I think 8K. That's when I think we'll see 12-bit or higher panels.
Okay.
That's what I'll think.
That's supposed
8K.
To be 2020. That's supposed to be 2020.
So there you go. 2020 is when I think.
There you go. Later than 2019, Gary. That's our guess.
That's our guess. The phrase pants flapping bass comes up from time to time. Never has that come up in my life, but I like it. Is that meant literally? Do Tom and Rob's setups actually make our pants flap? Gary's never had his pants flap. Pant legs actually flap, either at home or at a dealer demo. Is that an indication that the bass he's heard has never been 100% perfectly dialed in? Okay, I have, and I have said it on this podcast a number of times before, experienced pant flapping bass. I've never called it such, but that's what it was.
I've seen that phrase in reviews. So yeah.
Oh yeah, the Grauman's. They don't call it that anymore. It's now called something like Grauman's or Mann's Chinese Theater in Los Angeles, and I used to think that they had ants because I would feel the hairs on my legs moving, and I thought that they had ants in there. It took me a long time to figure out that I only felt that during the big bass scenes, and then I would feel like, and basically I always wore pants when I went there because it's cold. It's cold in the theaters. It usually is. They keep them nice and cold because of the stuff that's going to be happening later. All the people that are going to be in there breathing. So, did my pant legs actually flap? No, but there was a breeze that went up my pant leg. Now, to me, this is more indicative of where they put the ports on the subwoofers than anything else. It's not like they just shoved a bunch of subwoofers and it moved so much air that it's shaking my shirt and going up here. No, I think they had a bunch of slot ports right near the floor down the front, and it was going right underneath all the chairs and hitting all of it. And it was kind of directed that way by how, the layout of the theater and everything else. Has that ever happened in my home theater? Absolutely not. I've never heard that. Have I had bass hit me so hard that it made me nauseated? Yes. Yes, I have. It has happened to me before. In this theater, no, but I've been careful not to turn it up that loud. But I've gotten it awfully loud. So that has happened to me before, and still then I didn't notice my pants flapping or any of that. It can happen, but it's really just a term like saying, smooth mid-range. What does that mean, really? Well, it's just a phrase to tell you that whatever it was good. What is this pants flapping bass? It means that there's a forcefulness to it. Hit you in the chest bass. That would be
sure.
And I don't think it has anything to do with being dialed in. It has everything to do, in this case, with where the ports are located and what kind of ports they are.
Yeah. If you think about what makes a flag wave, it's wind going in one direction, not back and forth. So actually physically flapping your pant legs would be more about having like wind moving in one direction, not the vibrating of actual sound waves. So it's not really the sound waves. I agree. You're going to have it from a port. I've experienced physical pant flapping in my own theater, and that was exactly from the port. It had to be a front-facing port. That wind is coming out at a high velocity. The same thing happened when I had a rear-facing port and I had a curtain behind it, and the curtain sure was moving, right? Physically moving, but that's because the wind velocity coming out of a port, which is a much smaller diameter than the driver itself, you can have a pretty good gust of wind coming out of there, and that will physically make your pant leg flap. But that's not the bass itself. That's wind coming out of a port. So it does not mean that you have to physically feel pant legs flap to have it 100% dialed in. It's sort of a side effect of some sort of port facing you and wind coming at you.
That's right. So Rob described how Anthem lets you take two sets of measurements with their ARC, their Anthem Room Correction System, and switch between them. They're labeled movie and music, which Rob has labeled as silly, which is harsh coming from a Canadian.
You know what was funny?
They say silly.
In Anthem's newest product models, their like Atmos and DTSX models, in their own manual, they have a whole section on why you shouldn't turn your subwoofer off when you're listening to music. I'm like, cool, way to go, Anthem. I appreciate that.
So in Gary's case, he uses the two settings exactly like they're labeled. For movies, he has his infinite baffle subwoofer playing in addition to his two Dyne Audio subs. And for music, he just has the two Dyne Audio subs playing, no infinite baffle subwoofer. That said, he does tend to give both settings a try and has found that he prefers how some concerts sound with the infinite baffle playing, and others sound better to him without the infinite baffle sub. So, is it possible to have linear uniform bass response for both setups and still have it sound different when the infinite baffle sub is playing versus not playing? Or does the fact that it sounds different indicate that one setup is linear and uniform while the other is not? Should I read the second part too?
Let's do that first one first, I think.
Okay, so is it possible to add a third sub in a different thing and have it sound different and yet still be linear? Well, in the case of the infinite baffle sub, it is probably playing sounds that are lower than your Dyne Audio
Yeah, those
subs.
Dyne Audios cut off around 30 hertz. That's about how low down they go.
So if they didn't sound different, I would be surprised. Could it be linear? Yes. Could it not be linear? Also, yes.
Also, yes, yeah.
In fact, most likely yes, because you have a single sub in a single location playing these sub 30 frequencies. That's all it was playing was the 30 hertz and down. And instead, what it's doing is it's playing the frequencies above as well, unless you're crossing it over really super duper low, which I'm betting you are not. In which case, Is it possible to have linear bass with all three subs playing and then also have linear bass with just the two subs playing? It is possible. It is unlikely. I would think that you could have more linear bass with your two subs playing by themselves, and when you add the third sub, you get more deep bass, more impact, and less linear bass overall. Does that mean it's bad? No. It means, and that I think that's probably why you enjoy it for movies. It's going to give you more impact. It's going to give you more thump to the chest. And sometimes that nonlinearity, depending on where you're sitting, actually ends up sounding pretty good to you. So, as long as you're happy with it, it's fine. Which one do I think is the most linear one? The two subs by themselves. Which one do I think is the deepest one? The one with the infinite baffle sub. Which one do I... You know what I mean? But I think once you add that infinite baffle sub, you're adding a third sub in a non-optimal location, which is adding non-linearities across your entire space.
Yeah, so the reason I was saying it's silly, and the same reason that Anthem says in their own manual, is that if you have achieved linear bass that extends all the way down to the limits of human hearing and maybe even a bit lower, if you've achieved that, then why would you ever turn that off, right? That doesn't make sense. Sound is sound. Doesn't matter if it's music sound or movie sound or synthetic sound. Doesn't matter what it is. Sound is sound. If you have achieved linear bass that goes all the way down to 20 hertz or lower, there is never a reason to turn that off, because either the signal doesn't have it, so who cares? You're not playing it anyway, or the signal does have it, and now you get to...
What your music mode would be, yeah. Well, I don't need this infinite baffle sub because there's no content down that low anyways.
But okay.
If you're finding for music that your infinite baffle sub is adding something that you like, likely that's nonlinearity that you're enjoying. It is playing stuff within those higher registers, 30 hertz and above, that is boosting some frequencies, and you're saying, oh, look, that's different, and I kind of like it. There's nothing wrong with that. But if that's the case, then you should boost it through your two regular subs using an EQ, which would be very easy to do.
But yeah, the challenge is what you're hearing when it comes to bass is not just the subwoofer. It is the subwoofer plus your room plus your seating location. It is all of those things in combination. That's what determines what you hear. So if you say, I started out with two subs, and those two subs play down to 30 hertz, and they're linear, and you go, okay, that's what I've got. Now I want to extend them all the way down to 20 hertz or lower. I'm going to add this third sub that I know can play down below 20 hertz. You can't just do that, just throw that sub in there and call it a day. You can't do it that way because it completely changes the wave pattern in your room. Now you have three subs playing in combination. All of them are inside your room. You've got your seating location. Now you have a new combination. So just taking what was once linear and adding a third subwoofer to it does not let what used to be linear remain linear. It changes the wave pattern completely, and you have to do things over. Yeah.
And that's going to come into this next part of this question too.
Which then means that if you manage to now get the three subwoofer system linear, because you could, if you manage to get that linear and then you take the third subwoofer away, now it's not linear anymore. You have to make them separate. You can't think of them as here's one thing and I'm adding something to it without altering what was already there. It always changes what was already there when you're talking bass.
Let's just go back here. He is saying that he can have two sets of measurements.
Yes.
So you could, as long as you're just not turning the sub on and off, if you're switching from movie to music, it could be that both are reasonably linear. I would think that the movie mode that just is the music mode that's just using the two subs is going to be more objectively, measurably linear than the movie one with the three subs. Might not be the case, but both could be. Yeah, linear,
this is coming up with this next one. I want to talk a little bit about what art can and cannot do. So.
Right. So this is the next part of his question here. So assuming he's using the same target curve all the time, which I'm not sure I understand what he means by target curve.
Well, you're not tuning it to a different target curve for the two different measurements.
Right.
You have two different measurements, but using the same target curve.
Both are being tuned towards a linear response. That's say.
Right. Yeah.
Why do two different setups still sound different even after ARC or Anthem Room Correction is run on both of them? This applies to speakers too. A setup with all clip speakers plus ARC still sounds different from a setup with all Ravel speakers plus ARC. Both might measure to be hitting that arc target curve afterwards, but they still sound different. It's simply the same case with subwoofers too. Subwoofers,
Not
okay, what is
really between
No.
speakers and subwoofers. There's different things going on here. No.
Yeah. So if you're running them both, okay, they're both to try to get the same target. We'll say it's flat. Say you're going
Sure.
for flat.
Yeah.
Because it just makes our life easier. So both are running for flat. So you run ARC for your movie mode, and with all three subwoofers, and you go in for flat, and it gets it as flat as it can, which means it's making some corrections.
Yeah.
Then you run it for music with just your two subwoofers, and you're going for flat. It makes some corrections. If you took the corrections and you put them side by side, the corrections should be very different in the low end.
Mm-hmm.
Very different because of the addition of the third subwoofer, or the subtraction of the third subwoofer. So your corrections are going to be completely different. So when you run this, I mean, regardless of what speakers you're running it with, all it can do is what it can do. And usually what it can do is make some adjustments based on what is commonalities across the different measurement positions. Okay, commonalities, meaning that if in every seat there is a bit of a boost of a couple of frequencies, it can take those and knock those frequencies down. Therefore, you're now more linear across all the seats. What it can't do is if one seat has a, let's just randomly take a frequency, 60 hertz. At one seat, there's a 60 hertz peak of, say, 6 dB. Higher than what it expected to hear. Then the next seat, there's a 6 dB null, meaning it's going down 6 dB. It can't fix that. It can't make any correction to that will be beneficial, because anything it does will be worse.
If you cut down the 6 dB peak, you're going to now have a 12 dB dip in that other seat.
Right.
If you try to boost the 6 dB dip, you're now going to have a 12 dB peak in the other seat. That's making things worse in one seat.
So this is where we go back to it. The cherry on the top of your acoustics is your room correction. You get your room as right as you can. You get your placement as right as you can. You get your seats and everything as right as you can, so that your room correction can just fine tune it a little bit to make it a little bit better. And that's really what it's for. It's not for making every single speaker sound the same, because it cannot. And I don't think that even in the perfect situation, you could not take two speakers, put them in side by side, and have a room correction make them sound exactly the same. Right. The capabilities of the speakers are just flatly different in so many ways.
Yeah,
we're not just talking, from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, what it can and cannot play, not the extension. We're talking about how it crosses over, where the resonances are within not only the driver but the cabinet, what's happening with the baffle, what's happening with the port, where are these drivers located in relation to each other, what comb filtering issues are we having going on here. All these other things that are really going to play into how this speaker sounds. They're all design choices, and they're all design constraints many times. And all of this works together to give the speaker its sound. What's the room correction doing? Trying to make that speaker sound as close to your target curve as humanly as possible. But it's not going to be able to just EQ something so that every speaker sounds the same.
Yeah,
I mean, it could. If your target curve was, I am going to play 100 hertz to 200 hertz, and that's it, I bet it could make every speaker sound pretty damn close. But that, I mean, you'd have to take some frequencies where that every single speaker would have a driver that could certainly do that without anything else. And even then, you still have to deal with all the stuff about the actual cabinet, the baffle, any sort of driver breakup. I mean, crossover issues, all sorts of things.
Yeah, on the speaker side, ARC is adjusting one variable. It's adjusting frequency response. That's one variable. Yeah. You've got transient response, you've got dispersion, you've got distortion, and ARC doesn't do anything above 5 kilohertz. It doesn't touch anything above 5 kilohertz whatsoever. There's still a lot of information up there. So from speaker to speaker, you've got multiple variables that ARC is not touching at all. So speakers are going to sound different from each other. With the subwoofers, you know, like for example, like we were saying, you start with the two subwoofers, maybe you get them linear together. You add the third subwoofer, you've changed the wave pattern, maybe you've created a new dip or a new hump. Arc can't fix everything in the frequency response. If you have a null, if you've created a null, an actual cancellation at your seat, there's nothing Arc can do about that. It can't fill in a null.
It's not just Arc. It's all of them.
Any equalization.
No equalization fixes a null. What fixes a null? Changing
the position.
Your room. Well, position, but or changing your room. Basically adding room treatments in such a way as to move that null out of your seat.
Yeah.
Or to change the, take one wall, and just line it with 8 inches of absorption. It will certainly move that null. It will change the
well, maybe
how this.
If it's really low, then you might need 18 feet of absorption before it does anything.
Well, maybe something like that.
If it's really low, but yeah, I mean, again, to Anthem's credit, in their newest manuals, they talk about if you're going to have multiple subwoofers, they actually let you play a bass sweep on repeat, and they show you a graph on screen that is a real-time graph of the frequency response. It just refreshes itself over and over and over. And they say, before you run Arc, before you do that, play with the positioning of your subwoofers, however many you have, play with them until you get the flattest response that you can get in this real-time thing.
Why is this not a standard feature on every single receiver ever?
Yeah.
This is what we've been asking. You know what used to do this was the Velodyne SMS1.
Yeah.
That I love that thing for that alone. Even though it was 1/3 octave smoothing and everybody hated it because of this, that, and that, and that. I don't care. I loved that it would play a bass sweep and you could watch that. You could watch it. You could see how it was changing over time. And it was amazing. I mean, I think the most eye-opening things that ever happened at Audioholics the entire time I was there was when they got that system and Clint put it in his house and he opened the closet and the curve completely changed.
Yes.
He was like, I had no idea that
you just change the dimensions of your room
would make that big of a difference. And these guys have been in it for years before I got there. And this was also before Foley O'Toole's all his research that came out. So it was sort of like stumbling across a breakthrough without really realizing what he had stumbled across. Like the dimensions of your room are hugely important to your bass, and changing the dimensions just by opening a closet door makes a massive difference. So that's a great feature, and you should be taking advantage of that if you have an Anthem receiver.
No, and I love that they said that, because they said, look, get that frequency response as flat as you can with the positioning of your multi-subs before you run Arc, because Arc can't fix everything. They say that. I'm like, good on you, Anthem. I loved everything that was in that manual, because I'm like, they are spot on about that stuff. So yeah, again, if you manage to have your 3 subwoofers, your infinite baffle, obviously you're not moving that thing, but you have your 3 subwoofers. You use that real-time thing, you play with the positioning to get the response as flat as you can. It's like, then you don't want to turn off the infinite baffle, because then if you did it again, you'd discover that you have to move the 2 subwoofers that are still on to new locations to get the same result.
But as long as
you're not doing that. So
yeah, as long as the music versus movie mode has individual measurements for each of those modes, it should be fine.
But it's just if you've created a null by adding that third subwoofer, then you're not, even after you run Arc, you haven't been able to fix that. You can't fix a null.
Yeah. And where your 2 subs will be placed to make that third subwoofer work is not necessarily going to be the same place that where we're going to tell you to place them to make 2 subwoofers work.
That's right.
So I hate that every time we get across this topic. It's always like, just turn off the infinite baffle sub. I mean, that's all we say. It's terrible.
Well, I just wanted just to get linear bass and leave it.
I know, leave it on. Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.